Welcome to the podcast, everyone. And today I'm joined by Beppe Catanese, and he's currently working at Adyen on their developer experience and advocacy. And welcome to the podcast.
Hi, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right. Why don't we start with you telling us a bit about your career that led you to this world of developer experience over at Adyen?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I've always been in love with computer, probably most of us, and eventually went on studying and graduated in Milan computer science. A fun fact, I left Italy right away. I want to go abroad. I want to live in international environment. So I went and lived in work in the UK for 3 years, more as a web developer in e-commerce. I was going to actually do a sort of payment integration, fun enough. And then I moved to the Netherlands where I worked for in aerospace. So for a company creating a product for the European Space Agency, for the aerospace market industry. And then there you see I remember working with web development and the API were coming along. They started to do integration from data pack exchange to API calls. It's very interesting going through the whole journey through with the product that had to change because of that. And what happened years ago, I found this opportunity to join Adyen. If you work in the Netherlands, you know Adyen. It's a real place that you want to be. And I was basically a software architect, a lead, but the position was about developer relation, developer advocate. But the transition felt very natural to me because even before being at the end, I used to be involved in open source community. I had my own blog. I spent lots of time on Stack Overflow connecting to developers. So basically, walking to the Adyen apply to the job felt very natural, and what was very interesting is that the job actually was a little different what I expected. I consider myself now more a developer experience engineer, and after 3 years, I'm still loving it every minute of it.
Wow, that's great. Thanks for sharing that brief summary of your journey. I find it fascinating all the different paths people take into this field. I'm wondering, when you got started with APIs, was this when REST was already the standard, or did you experience other kinds of APIs when you were getting started?
I think it was resting was starting, and it was SOAP. SOAP was the data protocol, but it was really the learning curve was quite steep. And there was already some framework to do it. We were talking about API when REST was coming along, so JSON format, and I think that adoption went very quickly everywhere because you need that type of usability, simplicity to connect your API to your consumers. So at the layer that maybe provide a lot of other features, security, scalability, but it was just way too complicated for most of us. So, and there was a over design probably, and the effort didn't really make sense. So yeah, so basically I'm experienced mainly with REST.
Yeah. When I think of SOAP, I think XML, and I think verbose is kind
Yeah.
of the word that comes to mind. Um, and so you've seen quite a bit of an evolution in developer experience from when you started using APIs. What do you think are some of the things that have been sort of interesting as far as our progression in making it easier for developers to consume the APIs that we create?
Oh yeah, of course there are lots of changes even today, lots of things happening. To me, the major impact is the tooling. Tooling is really scaling up our work, and I'm not talking just about AI, but even all the tooling that you do for creating API and framework and the scaffolding application and integration. So, and the tooling, especially now in the API ecosystem, is amazing. So that I think is really the driving force about all those changes, that we are able to implement those changes with the speed of execution that allows the business and in our mission to go fast. That's I think what really makes a difference now.
Yeah. And I think that that's something that is a real focus for you over at Adyen is the developer experience around the APIs that you build, but also about SDKs and tools. So maybe we could tackle each of those one at a time, and you could share the work that you're doing, but maybe also how Adyen as a company is approaching creating great developer experience in those different areas.
Definitely. I feel like, with developer relation at the end, I want to borrow an example from our senior leader that she said, visualize three circles. You got this circle with the Adyen developers, then you have a circle with developers who are integrated at the end, and the other circle, big circle, with all developers that are developers but not necessarily work with Adyen. And developer relation, we try to sit in intersection of those spaces, and so we want to basically work with internal teams, but be also advocate and be representing the developer who are using the Adyen API and SDK. But at the same time, we want to connect with the rest of the development community, because that's where you need to bring these trends and what the standard from industry to really move forward in the best way possible. And we try to do that and apply, like you said, to different area. API is the main thing. We focus on API governance, specifically, especially myself, I focus on OpenAPI governance, and because OpenAPI is the language that we use to define the specification that describe the API behavior, how they get consumed, how they get used. So that we want to put lots of effort. Those API specifications need to enable our developers, the consumer, to implement the solution, to understand what's happening, and to create a seamless integration. And with that, we also, at the end, we have an API review group that meets to discuss major change in new products, and different people come along to contribute to that decision, or to, I would say, to the advice, because the team maybe needs some advice on how we would want to, implement the feature, and the API review group will look at, okay, this way we will do it, but mainly we try to provide a style guide that help the teams to make decision, not to ask for a meeting, not for permission. These are the standards, these are the guidelines. You guys should know how to move it forward. And then I think most of the focus is about creating this framework, creating a style guide that bring the consistency across all APIs. Excuse me. And then we have a lot of work with the SDK. So we have obviously SDK in 7 languages, I think. And then now what's happened, the way we help those teams is that we actually become the user of this API. So we create sample application that live on GitHub that show how to use the Java SDK, the Go SDK, the Node.js SDK. We provide those code snippets that make it very clear to develop how they should integrate those API in the code in the application. And we also contribute to SDK. I think you need to be part of that process. You need to understand, okay, I need this. I can also help you to build that feature or build that bug fix. So we really get involved with that process. And those are the 2 ways to really that we provide, enable developers and developer experience to use the Adyen platform. There's a little bit also work on tooling. So tooling is to me, it's really important. And we also want to provide developers the tools that make their life easier. You can think of mock server. You can think of we have a browser extension for testing cards payment. So also that has quite an important aspect in basically my day job, in my job.
Interesting. When it comes to SDKs, is that something that you folks have an engineering team that's dedicated to handcrafting those, or auto-generating, or some blend? I'm sort of curious how you guys are doing that.
Definitely, no, that's a great question. We do have a team that focuses on the SDK, but we have implemented what we call an OpenAPI pipeline, right? From the specification, we generate different artifacts, and one of those is the SDK in multiple language. So the process is fully automated, but you still need a team to look after the pipeline, to look after the extension. It also requires the expertise in different languages. Those SDK to be successful, they have to be APIMatic, they have to be really living within the tech context of the developer. So we need that obviously that focus is always there, but we were able to automate that. The team did a fantastic job there, and it's very important because we also evolve API very quickly. We have feature, we change the specification. So manual work has become error prone, has become slow, so we cannot do that. So that's how we are basically try to automate as much as we can, but also supervising basically this process with the team that they can take action and if something is needed.
Yeah, well, you're speaking my language right now. I'm curious with OpenAPI. So there's someone needs to be overseeing the change management of that. Would love to understand, how are you doing this? Is your OpenAPI being generated from annotations within your code base, or is it hand managed? Or I've even seen some people have workflows where they do a bit of both, where they're both generating and then validating the diff between their hand, sort of maintained one. So what are you guys doing as part of this pipeline?
We actually, that's a good question. We actually implement a bit of both. So a design first and a code first approach. Design first because we used to stoplight to do a design of some major feature. So we understood, we look at the specification, we can create a new branch, we can see the changes and what they're proposing, the new endpoint, the new attributes. So we can have that type of discussion with the team. What happened at that design, then it gets, once it's validated, the team will actually create the annotation in the code, right? So code first, that's how it always been. The code is what gets published. And then once we basically create the annotation, we follow the life cycle in an agile way of our APIs. And then we would generate the OpenAPI specification from those annotation, those code. And that will be the specification that goes eventually on GitHub, part again of our OpenAPI pipeline, and it gets basically provided to our consumers. Yeah, and then there's a final validation to make sure that the design it's not disaligned from what was discussed or what was agreed, what was initially the goal of that design.
Yeah, that sounds really sounds like a really good approach. I'm really in favor of design first. Gives you that, and also gives you this opportunity to put like a mock of an API in front of customers, get feedback before you actually get to that coding stage. I'm curious about testing though. If you're using annotations, does that mean you don't have to implement contract testing, or do you include that step as well?
We basically, the team will create some mock server within some mock capability within the code that we develop. So that we will have some mock services that simulate that API. It can be tested on that. And eventually, once it gets fully deployed on different environments, is also then there's a more integration and end-to-end testing to prove that it's working.
Yeah, and then you say as your pipeline progresses, you then generate SDKs. And are there tests that the team is writing around the output of the SDKs in the different languages? Or is that are the tests generated as well? I'm sort of curious about that.
So we do have integration unit test, integration tests that are generated from the templates, the same template that generate the SDK. So that, and then we have a sort of integration test that runs later from the final version. So there's a bit of combination. There's still some manual testing. There's some automated testing with obviously. Teams invest in integration and unit testing a lot because those are the test suite that can basically be executed every time there is a change, every time there is a release.
Yeah, no, that sounds great.
Oh.
I'm wondering if it's okay to share, because I'm sure maybe people listening are wondering, like, how many engineers or people does it take to manage this pipeline and get to the end result of having an OpenAPI definition that is generating these high quality idiomatic SDKs and things like that? Is it like including like product managers or product owners and engineers and QA? Like, and do you have a number that you know that you could share?
To be honest, I couldn't say because we basically we have spent a lot of time creating the framework, right? So there is no one team that creates the specification, but there will be different team looking after the product. They design the API, and then eventually they code it, and we will create the specification for that API. So we have our Adyen platform is global, is quite comprehensive, and different products, and each product is basically a family of API. So each team is a bit independent. So that part is automated, and then the SDK generation, there is one team that is supervising the generation. Even that now is fully automated, so it's not a large team, but I wouldn't say about a number. But we don't really we focus a lot on automating and making those pipeline effective, because we typically we require to scale up very quickly. We have lots of products, and we want to keep our speed of execution. So we don't really have a huge amount of team working on a specific part of the platform.
Yeah, interesting. So you actually have multiple teams. I don't know how you call it, products, divisions. I don't know that own different parts of your API that you're presenting to developers, and how many different teams are feeding into this. And I assume that you create a unified developer experience on the other end, that developers don't really know that there's this org structure behind your APIs.
Definitely. So the internally there are different teams because the platform is big. We are a financial technology platform. So there's payment, there is a platform, there is financial services, and within that different products. So those teams fit in the same framework. But eventually what we have a single platform that we expose to our developer to develop the Intel with Adyen in a unified way. And that's actually my job. I always say I get in action when the specs are on GitHub. Okay, now I'm ready to go, right? What is behind the scene, which is a lot of work, it's a lot of automation, and a lot of talent put there, is translating in at least in this attempt to create a unified developer experience across our product. It's a single platform, so that's for us, it's a must.
Yeah. Wow, it sounds like you've tackled some really, really hard problems there, and created your own support platform internally to service all these different teams. I'm wondering, when you and other folks are thinking about what tooling you need, how do you go out and discover tools? Are these do you go and find open source projects and get involved? Do you build your own tools internally and then open source them for others to use? I'm just sort of wondering, like, what's working? What are you seeing that works for you when it comes to OpenAPI tools?
Yeah, I think it's like for any tool, it's let's say on a need basis, right? Developer, the team has a problem. How do we solve it? So they need to find something that works for them, and obviously eventually needs to work for their platform. I think we have our philosophy. It's open source or built in house. That's one of our slogan motto. And it's true like that. Open source is because we want to basically contribute back to the community. So often we release some of the tools that we build, or we contribute back to some of the other projects that we use. And we obviously typically also depend on people following trends, right? If a tool is working very well for different developers and different organizations, you hear about it. Okay, you're interested about it. What it is, but will it work for us? So that's why this is a part of discover and try, and we do build in house when we think that there's nothing that really suits us, or we want to keep that independent. The speed of execution, that's for us is very important.
Yeah. So if I am hearing correctly, on occasion there are things that you build that you feel are proprietary and that you want to keep in-house because there's something about it that gives you a competitive advantage. So some of these tools aren't necessarily going to end up on GitHub.
Yeah.
when it comes to your SDKs, is that something that you're open sourcing to get feedback from developers? You said 7 different languages, so are those available as far as source code?
Definitely. So we do our SDK together with a couple of more projects are open source on GitHub. And the reason are that I think open source is because those are SDK that are used by an organization, by a developer. And I think you want to be very transparent about, okay, this is source code. But also to get, some feedback, to get you get issues, you get a suggestion, and we do also get contribution, which is very nice. When you're a developer from your customer, from the organization, they actually contribute back because they found a problem or they suggest something and they want to contribute back into the library. That's also quite very nice. We see that happening more and more. And so it's the open source model works very well for SDK. Yeah, that's what we've seen.
Are there any challenges taking contributions when you've got this machine and this workflow currently to create the output, which is SDK libraries and documentation and things like that? Are you able to negotiate the pull requests and the feedback from developers very easily? I'm just wondering. I've been in that position before. I'm kind of curious how
Yeah.
you're taking on that challenge.
It's a very good question because sometimes they want to update something that we would basically get from our generation, right? So, and then sometimes maybe it's possibility to merge requests if it's a small change and the next iteration of the pipeline will override the same change because they found the problem, which we will fix anyway. The idea is that the OpenAPI SDK is the source of truth and everything goes in there. So wherever we find something that we need to change, we will go back to the drawing board and address it there and start again the pipeline. Obviously, you want to reward those contributors and not talking about sending a package that we also do. It's very nice. Also, I think it's quite rewarding where you submit a contribution and it gets merged. It's a nice feeling. So we want to accommodate as much as we can. And sometimes it's not possible just to the scope of the change is too big or it just doesn't play very well. But when it's possible, we try to do that because it's nice to nurture that sense of community and then recognize the work of other people.
Yeah. I'm wondering, in that situation, would you tag or mention the person in a release note and say, thank you for highlighting, you could highlight what the fix was and mention that person? Is that something you guys do, or?
We do because we create the GitHub release that will collect all the GitHub issue and pull requests. So it will naturally put all the contributors. Nobody, I think it's something that GitHub does. So is mentioned by if your name you are contributed somehow, your name will be there. So that's also very nice, I think.
Yeah. I think it's great to acknowledge the contributions of the community, whenever possible. Like you said, it gives them a good feeling about your company and the work that you guys are doing. Developer experience overall, creating documentation, these SDKs, the tools, the browser extensions you mentioned, these are a big investment. And I think sometimes there's lots of stakeholders at companies. They aren't necessarily on the engineering team. And they often ask the question like, what's the return on investment? Or how are we benefiting from all this engineering work you guys are doing? And I'm just curious, are there ways in which you're measuring the impact of offering a good developer experience and communicating that to those key stakeholders?
Oh yeah, that's the $1 million question. Like everybody wants to know, okay, what is the value? What is the impact? And I think we have the same situation. We want to make impact, but to show that impact is there. And how do you measure? How do you present it? I'll say we use a mix of qualitative approach and data points, right? I think the quality approach works because we have the NPS, Net Promoter Score, where we basically assess the satisfaction of the user. We zoom into the tech aspect, of course. The NPS is quite broad. But we have merchant days where we invite our customer and we discuss feature. We also zoom into technically, so we get some of this feedback loop together with survey and feedback session. That's also very important. You get the feeling that what developers think about your API, SDK, your approach. You provide the testing tool that they need. So that's actually that type of feedback channel needs to happen. It's very important. But also we look at data points because we obviously the platform we got lots of data. And we want to make sure that we have also monthly approach. For example, the SDK adoption. Okay, you invest in SDK, we have a pipeline, works very well, but is it worth it? So we're looking at GitHub metrics over time. Are the library being adopted? Are they fork? Are they clone? Are more issues? There are more stars. So that's also very important. And we also look at the usage of those SDK on our live platform. Okay, so how many requests we got with the Java SDK? How many requests we got with Ruby? Are they growing over time? So that's definitely something that we do. And we do same also with the Postman collection. We provide Postman collection to our user. Are those being used? Which are used? Which are the most successful endpoints? Does it mean that is very useful for them, or maybe we are lacking a functionality somewhere? So we need to understand this data to make this decision. We're looking at what we call time to integrate. I mean, how long does it take if you sign up with Adyen to make an API call? It's an hour or it's a week. That's very important metric that we need to understand, for your new user base, and maybe look at time frame, how long it takes for a customer from testing phase to go to production and things like that. Some time ago we did a nice exercise. We had several support tickets on webhooks. Webhooks is a very important part of every platform that wants to scale. And developers don't really like webhooks, they like APIs. But when you say now you have to wait for us to send you something, okay, it's difficult to test, it's difficult to consume. So we actually invest a lot in terms of content. So let's create a blog, let's create a video, let's create some sample apps, let's create a Postman collection that show the payload of those webhooks. And then, over time that we go back, are those tickets going down? Are those tickets at least different, are moving? So that's what we try to do. Looking at the number of ticks, number of issues, it's also a little bit, the challenge is that they also go up because maybe you have more user, right? So you have to also make that a bit relative interpretation. Or if you have more issues because there are more usage, which is a good thing, or for actually the quality is deteriorating. So that's also the thing we try to look. So it's a combination of both, and then ultimately you present that to stakeholder, and then you basically combine that with the feedback you get from your user. So that's your stakeholder, our senior manager will talk to customer, and then obviously that feeling needs to be supported by their response, by the reaction together with the data.
Wow, it feels like you're hitting all the metrics that I would think of when it comes to developer experience. You've got NPS scores, but then you have, I assume, maybe quotes or conversations with customers. You've got the time to first API call, time to production, measuring not just the number of support tickets, but maybe the kinds of questions that are being asked. Are they asking basic questions or more complex? How do I solve my problem with your API
Indeed.
questions? Because you could see an increase in support tickets, but the actual questions being asked are better questions or more useful for the developer, as opposed to how do I authenticate? Like, if you can reduce those getting started sort of questions through documentation, that's great.
Yeah, the authentication is an interesting aspect, because we also done actually an analysis of the error rates, because you go and distribution of this error. You type cluster, there's a lot of security error. What does it mean? Is that we don't make it very clear, because you need to provide an API key. Why do we get so many errors? So you're looking at those cluster of error to understand, okay, can we do something about this? Is something that we're lacking, or we're not explaining something to our developer? So that's also, I'm pretty sure that there are also other metrics that you can use, and probably they will come up over time. But I think you just have to be a little bit creative and try to get all the insight that you have to try to make a good decision.
Yeah. Are you using anything unique to measure the usage of the different tools and SDKs. In the past, we were pretty basic with like a user agent string to track like volume of API calls and ratios of Java versus PHP developers. But that was years ago. I'm wondering if there's some new tooling or things that people are doing to measure that even more effectively.
Well, typically, I think in the HTTP header and user agent with this is something the standard way of doing things like that. You will pass the type on library, the version, and you can then build all your data. So that's I think I've seen other I think we did in the past put that information as part of the payload, and that doesn't really work very nice. You want to leave your payload, it's part of your request. It's part of your business function. But the header, it's probably a good approach. Maybe there are other ways, but that can become as long as it gets ingested in the data platform, then we can make available to the team to make their analysis, and that's I think the header works quite well.
Yeah, I feel like there's a balance. People don't want you to collect too much information about them or maybe how they're using your API or their own use of your SDK, but then that data helps you inform where you focus your energies around different languages, perhaps. So there's this balance of privacy and data collection to help you do a better job in servicing developers. That's kind of my opinion on that. I don't know how you feel.
Indeed. Yeah, no, I agree that, it's a little bit, maybe we take a little bit, but we promise we're going to give back more. So it's a little compromise that I think works for both parties.
I like that philosophy. That's really smart. Let's maybe we can shift gears a little bit away from Adyen to some other projects and work that you've done. You mentioned that you've actually been contributing to open source, and specifically that you've contributed in the past to OpenAPI Generator. And I'm wondering how you got involved and sort of what that experience was like for you.
Yeah. Now, the OpenAPI Generator is an open source project that allows to generate code from a specification. You can generate both SDK client code to make those requests, or a server-side implementation that you will basically implement your API, basically. And you can also generate documentation from an OpenAPI. You can generate HTML or markups or markdown. So it's not a lot of features. But the way I was involved, because it's we were using the generator already in Adyen when I joined for the SDK, and I thought that what is the best way to contribute to SDK is actually to solve the problem I have, and then this problem that I solve, which is also important for the Adyen SDK. It's also then as a contribution for the community. So some other developer, some other organization will benefit. I think that's probably the best position that you can work on a open source project that you use. Therefore, you understand the problem, you understand how you want to fix it, but that the contribution, it goes beyond your need or your benefit. It goes back to the community, to the developers that will hopefully understand that and then maybe do the part of fixing and contributing in a different way. So that's how it started. And I found really, really fascinating the amount of learning you can do. You learn from different people, you exchange ideas, you're networking. And for me, what worked very well is that I wanted to work a lot with OpenAPI, understand really the details, the different nitty-gritty. I think the best thing was to actually go into a generator and say, okay, this is how an OpenAPI gets converted and work in Java code, and how a specific feature OpenAPI becomes something in a Java class. So that was very interesting and mainly a really great opportunity to learn.
Yeah. Yeah, I found I worked with it in the past and found it really interesting. To me, it seemed like there were, and maybe I'm simplifying it, but it seemed like there was the core engine was written in Java, and then there were the templates that were written. There were mustache templates, and you could pretty much make the output any language you wanted. So you could make improvements to the templates in a specific language that you were targeting, or there was the engine itself that you could work on. Did you work on both of those things, or was there one that you spent more time in?
I actually, yeah, that's exactly the way it works. I work on both because our SDK are basically based on those templates. So the Java template, the Go template, root template. But what we have done, like most of the should do, the default template works very, very well, but you want to customize the output, right? You want to put your signature, you want to um, inject your dependency or your utility. So then we create custom templates to basically produce the output in Ruby, in Java, in Golang the way you want, and has to be the Adyen signature and everything else. I also create, I work on the engine because I was able to, I had to create, for example, one of my contribution was introducing the webhook, and they are part of the addition to OpenAPI 3.1. And there was something missing in the OpenAPI Generator. So that was one of my latest contribution. And there I had to work on the actual engine to make sure that, okay, now there is a new entity, which is a webhook and has basically a different way of working, how that translates into a working code. And it's very interesting to see in the OpenAPI file that you have API, so that you basically you describe your API, but also you describe your books. The books typically what you send to your consumer.
Yeah.
And then now you want to generate a code that implements an API, will be a code that you call the SDK. But if you want to generate a webhook, it will be a piece of code that you host because the platform will send you a webhook. So you understand all those nitty-gritty details that require when you have very special requirement. And I think working on both the engine, both the templates, it's really, really fascinating to understand the complexity of it.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a great experience.
Yeah. So when you say that you worked on webhooks, does that mean that you were because it generates both, you could generate server side or client side code with,
Correct. Yeah.
with the webhooks project aspect that you worked on, were you focusing on generating both of those sides, both the server and client implementation, or one over
No,
the
for the
other?
webhooks, what the idea was, so imagine at the end, like a platform like Adyen is using webhooks at scale, and we send events to the consumer, and then basically we send a payload which need to consume. So with this specification, webhook specification into the OpenAPI, what you can do, you can generate basically the template of Java code, Ruby code that will be able to process that event.
Yes.
So you will generate server-side code that receive that payload, will serialize in a Java in an object, and then you can do whatever your business rule demand or require you to do it. So that's the type of work that I did. At the end, of course, we have a custom code to create all these events, but that the webhook template will be for a user who want to consume the event that comes from the end without implementing the whole serialization, the model, and everything else. So that's a good, get it started if you want to consume events from Adyen and from any other platform.
Yeah, yeah. I've done some of that work by hand to help developers consume webhooks, and it was it wasn't a lot of code, but it was sometimes a struggle to understand how to best create the signature so that you could then match your signature to know that this was coming from a valid source, that this webhook was receiving data and it wasn't malicious. And that was once you figured it out, you could do it in multiple languages. But it's that first time doing it, you might spend a little bit of time figuring out, because not everyone implements webhooks the same. Is OpenAPI helping with that, where there's more standard ways in which people are signing their payloads from a webhook to make it easier for developers going from platform to platform? Not yet?
I know exactly what you mean. No, unfortunately, I don't think you do that. The HMAC signature is something we also implement, and that's what the SDK comes really handy, because you can offer those functions. If you want to calculate HMAC signature, here's the function, you just have to pass the signature, which would typically be in the header. And the code behind is very complicated, different language by language. So OpenAPI per se doesn't really cover that. That's a really good point. Maybe it could be something for OpenAPI 4.0. So that's where the SDK really play that additional value. They can give you all these extra tool utilities and function to really consume the webhook. In this case, it would be an API with code that is provided as part of the SDK.
Nice. Now I'm gonna ask a spicy question because I feel like you've been deeper into the OpenAPI Generator project than I did. I never contributed, but I did use it. I used a lot of templating and did a lot of modifications to get the results I wanted. But that was several years ago, and as time has gone on, I've looked back at the project and I've seen that the number of issues and pull requests have hit, from my perspective, pretty high levels: 4,000 open issues, 400 open PRs. I'm wondering, should developers be concerned about that, or does the project need more contributions? Is it a victim of success where it's gotten so much attention that it's now kind of being drowned in feedback? What's your perspective?
Yeah, let me say I'm contributor or being contributor. I'm not a maintainer, so I will have to. Okay, I can only try to interpret what's happening. There are a lot of issues, too many issues, and I think you typically when you look for a new project, you will look at is the project active, how's it going in terms of issue and NPR. So that's obviously a good indicator. I think the reason, in my opinion, is that there is no an active backlog management, right? There's the true open source community based on people who are passionate about it. They put their own time, their own investment, including maintainers. So there are not many, let's say, resources available to that. I think on the pull request situation is a little better because at least my experience, I see all the recent contribution are typically merge or at least the answer. And again, maybe there's no backlog management, but we try to keep up to date with the latest development. It is a true open source community. So if you create an issue, the idea is that, there's an issue, and then I will try to maybe contribute with the PR. Nobody's going to look at that unless it has the same problem. And the same for PR. If you get some feedback, the idea is that you probably actively absorb the feedback and implement the feedback. Sorry. So that's the. So maybe it needs a little bit of both, right? With the community, understand it's an open source community. We all in together. We have to help each other. Maybe some more developer that dedicates time there. The company could maybe contribute a bit more with the developer effort or sponsorship. So the combination of both. But I think truly an open source community, that's how it operates, and with the pros and cons of the situation.
Yeah. I must imagine that maintaining and trying to manage a community with that much feedback is a real challenge, especially when you get into opinions around what is idiomatic Java code look like, or idiomatic Python code look like. And these languages continue to evolve, so people are going to have different opinions, and maybe I'm not on the latest version of Java, and I don't necessarily want that. I want it to be backwards compatible to Java 12 or Java 8, and therefore I imagine there's very differing opinions on the direction templates should go in, for example, and that can make negotiating that compromise probably even more challenging.
Yeah, indeed, it's like this, and so because there are so many different languages, and within a language, often there are multiple frameworks. You end up with lots of experts, and it depends who you're talking to, the different opinion. And typically, there is maybe somebody who's contributed, for example, the PHP library 5 years ago, and is no longer interested in doing anymore. So somebody is taking over, or at least is trying to help now. He has a completely different experience. So yeah, there's a bit of volatility there that is also an additional challenge, and that's what it is for open source community to try to make the best out of it.
Yeah. And on the topic, we'll continue on this topic of open source, which is great. if I understand correctly, you've created a converter generator that takes OpenAPI and creates a Postman collection. Did I get that right? You mentioned something along those lines.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, so basically we wanted to offer a Postman update Postman collection to our developers. And of course, you can do them manually, right? But it's a lot of effort with lots of API. They change very often. And I don't think the solution doesn't scale. So with the team, we come up with the idea. Let's automate that. So if we can generate Java code and PHP code, we can generate a Postman collection in JSON file. So we created this generator that goes through using the same engine of the SDK. It basically define a different mustache templates. And then the output will be basically a JSON file, which is compliant with the JSON, the Postman JSON format 2.1, and it provides for each endpoint. It will create a request, and what the generation does is actually using the best feature of the OpenAPI association, in my opinion, which is OpenAPI examples. Right? When you describe an OpenAPI endpoint, you provide your model for the request, for the response, the status. Within that information, you can also add examples. And that's a really powerful feature because you can first developer understand very easily, okay, this is the JSON that you want from me, or this is the JSON that will get if there is an error. A tooling then can leverage those information to create, for example, Postman collection. So we have a request example that typically becomes a request in Postman. And then if you have a response example, we will match that request with the response. They open up also opportunity for contract testing, for validation. That's really important. Our goal was to provide our user, our developer, with up-to-date collection. I think we went beyond that because we could actually create those responses, that match requests, and then open opportunity for automating testing of those APIs. So that's really really fascinating. The outcome. We were a Postman.com. Also, we got an award for that. So that's a really big satisfaction for the team.
Yeah, well, by the way, congratulations. I was at PostCon and saw your name or your logo up on during the keynote. So you were given an award, and this was for best Postman workspace or one of the top ones.
Yeah, that's a really interesting. So the award is actually best API, right? So that's basically a award in terms of developer experience. And what happened? Of course, they look at the Postman collection. But the Postman collection really is basically the phase of the API behind. So if the API behind the Postman collection doesn't provide the functionality that you need, is like obviously the Postman collection, there's so much you can do. But we have a very strong checkout API, really used by lots of our users. And we basically create on top of that Postman collection that has, using the example, allow you to test those payments in different payment methods and see the response, see documentation. And it's fully automated. So that's if tomorrow we have a change, we have to make sure that just our GitHub pipeline has a green color, and then everybody will be happy.
Nice. Yeah, that's so interesting. It sounds like this project for converting OpenAPI to Postman was part of adding functionality to your existing toolkit because that sort of thing already exists in different tools like Redocly CLI has it. APIMatic has a conversion tool transformer that will go from like 20 different formats in either direction. So it includes Postman and Insomnia and other things like that. But you've solved it in yet another way that's going to be useful for teams that are using a similar tool chain, which is great. I'd love to wrap up our conversation with something that's pretty new, at least it feels new to me, which is OpenAPI Workflows. And I'm wondering, what's the vision behind this, and how do you think developers are going to benefit from them? Because it's not part of the OpenAPI spec. It's kind of its own thing, right? And I'm just curious to learn more and understand how it's going to help developers in the future.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, if you think about it, when we use API, we don't really just do one call and we are done, right? We use different calls. We design, compose a workflow with those API calls. So the OpenAPI, there's an OpenAPI initiative with the interest specialist group led by Frankel Cummins from Smart Bear, and what they are proposing now is specification for a machine readable format for OpenAPI flows. So like based on the OpenAPI format, you will have a specification that describe how the different steps, different operation get combined to create a workflow. So there's a workflow, there are different steps, each step an API call, and within each step there is an input and output. And I think there are different use cases that's really, really interesting for developer. The first one is the purely developer experience. If I need to make today an API implement a flow where I have a payment method, I make a payment, for example, and then I make a donation at the end, and then I use a gift card, for example. The way I will do now, I will go to a web page, I will scroll down, and step 1, step 2, step 3. But with this specification, we will be able to visualize that in front of the developer, see, okay, the step 1 is this call, what is the payload? Then step 2 is this one, what is the payload? And what information go from one step to another. So that's really powerful, in a way to communicate how to use the API. It will be very interesting for SDK generation. If you think about it, we have a specification that has an API, comprehensive API of a platform, for example, but I'm only interested in making a specific type of operation. So what if I could generate an SDK that are basically everything I need to implement my workflow, which is payment. I don't want anything else. So that generation could actually section that part of the specification and create the SDK that I need for fulfilling my use case. And the last one, which I'm really, really excited about, is testing. This format, what it provides as well, this OpenAPI workflow specification, introduce the concept of runtime expression, which means each step you have some expression that can basically, you validate the response status, the response payload, check if an article is there. So that means that we could, every step, basically introduce some validation script that say, okay, at the end of the step, I need my status code to be 200 and the reference to be a certain value. And I find this extremely exciting because as a developer that I'm consuming your API, I want to decide what to test. I would like to combine the API that you provide platform in the way I'm going to use on my integration, and I want to test, define those validation that they need to verify to build the confidence that your API, your integration is working. So that I think it will be really exciting to see how it develops, but I think it'd be really a revolutionary change in the API landscape. We'll have to see.
Yeah, it sounds really interesting and very useful. Are you part of this working group, and is there a timeline for when we might have the first version of this available to consider, so vendors can start implementing them?
I'm not part of the group. Actually, it's an open group, so I think it's anybody's welcome. A very, very friendly community. I actually met Frank Cummins already, but the whole group is I've been contributing to a couple of issues, for example. There are, I think the timeline is not long because there is already a draft. Working draft. You can actually already design the API. I actually play with some of the Adyen API, try to model the workflow. It's a very interesting outcome. So I don't expect this to be years away. Maybe there'll be some months or something. I'll wait to see. But it's on GitHub. They got their own space, and the community is very active. So I think they will make it happen very soon.
All right. Well, we've covered a lot in this conversation. I feel like I'm going to have to dig up a lot of links and include them in the show notes so people can go and do further research on all these great topics that we've covered today. But I want to wrap up by saying thank you for taking the time to join us on the podcast today. It's been a lot of fun, and wishing you all the best with the developer experience over at Adyen.
It was a great chat. Thank you very much.